I met Yuri about a year ago, and now I've spent a good part of my career writing about the titans of this business, rising and well, actually seldom rising, usually falling. And the interesting thing about getting to know Yuri is that I actually think that he is the coming titan of this business. So I feel that Yuri is the first mogul who I've gotten in on the ground floor with. So that maybe he will return my calls, and which he does now, and actually he's a sort of a remarkable source. But I feel that someday Yuri may let me write his biography, and then he'll never speak to me again after that. But Yuri, for those who don't know this most basic fact, is the largest outside shareholder in Facebook. I believe over 10% at this point, or no, I think
less than 10, and second largest.
The second largest outside shareholder. Yes. Have you fallen?
No, it's Excel Partners.
Well, let's start with the social network. Is this you've seen this from the inside? Is it real?
The movie?
Yeah.
Well, I've only seen the last year and a half, so I have no way of knowing what happened back then.
Well, does it ring true though?
I think some parts of it.
You're not making this easier. Well, okay, then let's go back. How did you meet Mark Zuckerberg?
Well, I was introduced to him by the ex-CFO Gideon Yu, and it was a couple of years ago, and we just.
Well, what was this? Since Mark Zuckerberg is now a cinematic character, you have to give this to me in cinematic terms. Where were you, and what was he wearing?
He was not wearing a tie at that time. He was still, because the next year was the year when he was wearing a tie and was very serious. But at that time he was basically, wearing, not wearing socks and that sort of thing.
Hood? Did we get a hood?
Yes.
Oh. And so you walked into this room with a guy without socks and a hood, and then you just gave him several $100 million.
Well, we started to talk about social networks, and he was curious about the Russian experience, because I think his largest competitor is in Russia, and he was, really curious on, is there anything different in Russia compared to his experience in U.S. and other places?
And when did you know, at what point, that he was a keeper?
Keeper?
That he was somebody you wanted to get into business with for the long term.
Well, before we met, obviously, because I've been following the company for a long time.
So you knew before you met him, you knew that this was the company that you wanted to come to America with.
Yes, I mean the company was growing almost 1% a day, and when you see something growing 1% a day without any advertising, just through the word of mouth, you kind of know that there is something to it.
But there were a lot of other investors who could have seen this too, and partly they did see it, and partly you saw it with a greater canniness because you made the deal.
Well, we have invested in 5 social networks prior to investing in this one. And I think we just saw all variations of monetization that other people just couldn't see because they've not been a part of those investments.
I think one of the things that at least the U.S.-centric point of view is, and the interest in you is that you didn't exist at all, and then all of a sudden you did. All of a sudden you were a significant player on the scene. I mean, it was like everybody. Suddenly there was a press release that announced that that you were the new kid on the block, or the new sheriff in town. Just fill that in a little for us. How did you literally? How did you get to the point of thinking that Facebook was the ticket, and B, that your experience led you to this meeting with Mark Zuckerberg?
Well, Russia is a place of a very significant number of very talented engineers and programmers and hackers and people like that. And Russians won, I think, 6 last world championships in programming out of 10 in the last few years. And even though probably half of them go to Silicon Valley and kind of stay there and start companies and work in companies, then the other half is actually staying in Russia and making some very interesting projects. And that's how I started 10 years ago. And then in the course of 8 years, just been focusing on that part of the world, and that's how the confidence came to make investments outside.
Are you an oligarch?
Well, it depends on the definition, but oligarch, I think, is somebody who can influence people and rule and have power. But I mean, if you saw the movie, I mean, it's very obvious that you cannot have any power over this geniuses, and they kind of run on their own anyway. So we're sort of in the service industry to this outstanding individuals.
So that means you're sort of the oligarch of nerds.
No, it's I'm a servant rather. I'm somebody who is trying to align my interests and the interests of our investors with them, rather.
Now, just your background. I mean, we've had this discussion before, but I think it's interesting to. Would be interesting to everyone if you just a quick thumbnail.
I have a physics background. I'm a theoretical physicist by training, and was born in Moscow, and went to Wharton Business School in U.S., and then went back to Russia, and sort of about 10 years ago started to invest in internet startups. And in fact, launching them myself, also incubating and investing small amounts of money, and then just bigger and bigger over time.
We lost the World Bank in here.
Yes.
Right.
Well,
that was so Wharton, and then
I consider those years as kind of lost. So.
Good answer. So you built up DST in Russia, making it the dominant digital company in Russia. Yes.
Which went public last Friday.
Successfully went public. Yes. You're happy?
As long as investors are happy, I'm also happy.
And are investors happy?
Well, it was more than 20 times oversubscribed, and then it traded up. So I think so far people are happy. Mazel tov.
So you
Well,
built
actually,
up,
I think it's kind of an interesting because nobody was really expecting that level of interest, and it kind of occurred to me in the middle of this roadshow that that was the first time that the social story was actually told to the broad public. We've met probably 150 investors globally, and this was the first time they were hearing about that side of internet, and apparently many of them found it very appealing and interesting.
does it give you any kind of basis on which to change your thinking about the value of Facebook?
I think it kind of already happened almost instantaneously because it kind of turned out that there is a very significant momentum behind this, social internet, and now a very wide range of public investors was really very enthusiastic about it.
We'll come back to when the precise time that may or may not become meaningful to Facebook. But first, I want to say, in understanding your path, you built up DST, and then you made the decision that you wanted to do something in the U.S. If you can just talk about that a little bit, because it's not necessarily intuitive that someone who's runs a digital, even a significant digital company in Russia comes to the U.S.
Well, that's where 70% of innovation is happening, and Russia is the place that is sort of between U.S. and China, and the business models that you find in my part of the world are basically kind of the mixture of, essentially our company that went public is a mixture of Facebook and Tencent. So you are kind of in the middle of these various influences, as Russia always was historically, between East and West. And you kind of probably have a sort of unique perspective on different business models. And, for example, our second investment was Zynga, but we knew that this freemium model is working in China for a while, and it has been working in Russia already. So kind of by extension, you would assume that this will work in the US as well.
Still, you're almost singular in being a significant Russian businessman to, in essence, make your most significant bets in the U.S. So is that because you went to Wharton, because you knew had some comfort with the U.S., or is it really just about following the technology?
Well, it's hard to say. It's sort of really interesting that others are not, doing the same thing. I would expect that in the next few years you would see a couple of major investors out of China, for example, who are making significant U.S. investments, and maybe a couple from India. So I would kind of see it really an organic development going forward, that somebody from a BRIC country would really try to make some bets in the U.S.
What's the structure of your of your investments? You're now one of the leading investors in digital companies in the U.S. Who are your partners? Where's the money from?
It's basically a fund structure that's called DST Global, as opposed to the Russian company that is an operational business. So it's really a fund structure with probably 10 to 15 investors, both Russian and US, both private and institutional. Started as mostly Russian, but then over time really developed into more global investor base.
you came into this market, as I understand it, in essence because you offered a better deal. Can you talk a little about the nature of how your money was better than the traditional money?
Well, I think initially when we invested in Facebook, we paid more than other people were willing to pay at the time. But that's because we saw very clearly monetization patterns in our previous investments in social networks in other parts of the world. As far as Zynga and Groupon is concerned, we were really leading the rounds of multiple investors coming in. In Zynga, there were 3 investors. And in Groupon, there were 2 investors.
Well, isn't it, though, really a different approach than the traditional VC or PE approach to these kind of companies? I mean, it almost has the feeling of it that it's a new kind of instrument, a new layer of financing.
Well, basically, I think maybe something that initially set us apart is being completely instrument agnostic. We've been buying preferred stock, we'll be buying common stock, we've been buying stock from employees, all kind of securities, with the understanding that, they will all converge, in the near future into something that will be traded. And most of the deals that we do, they are secondary. 80% of the money is really going to paying off, early investors, founders, employees, that sort of thing.
So you've really stepped in and done the job that that turning to the public markets has usually done.
At the time, yes.
So you're effectively giving companies several more years of being private.
Yes, and some of them are actually seeking that privacy for the next several years.
So are you now a competitor to traditional VCs?
Well, what is happening is that traditional VCs are now going more into late stage. The last Andreessen fund is really a very broad mandate to invest in startups, VCs, and then as well as late stage. And you also see traditional buyout funds like Silver Lake that are moving in this direction as well. So the place is really just becoming more competitive and more kind of normal.
So they're now mimicking you.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we are seeing them on a few transactions.
So you went into the market, you undercut them, and now they are forced to respond to.
Well, I don't know how innovative was what we have been doing. We've been kind of really trying to follow our investment strategy, but we just see more competition lately.
Now, I mean, some people are calling DST. Now, is that the entity that you invest through?
Yes.
Yeah. So people are calling DST the SoftBank of this era. And that's a little unfortunate because, as I recall, SoftBank lost more money than has ever been lost by anyone. But you get my meaning.
It might still happen to us as well.
So SoftBank was in a position. I mean, they really dominated this in a way. They made the first internet generation. So if you are taking that position in this internet generation, what does that mean in terms of your responsibilities to this business, in terms of the legacy that you want to promote?
Well, I think the difference with SoftBank is that we are trying not to deviate from the strategy, which is invest in social internet globally, in a very narrow sense of the word. But I think Facebook really branched out in mobile. They acquired, mobile carrier in Japan, and I think that's what probably caused this strategic shift, that they kind of withdrew from U.S. and focused on their home market, really on a mobile sector mostly. But then, recently, we've been seeing more of them in U.S. as well.
Back to this idea of essentially leaving your base, coming to the U.S., becoming so quickly and such a large player in the U.S. First, how much time are you spending in America?
About 25%.
And when you're there, where do you live?
Mostly in the hotels.
And any plans to spend more time?
I think that what really people actually value when we make investments is this kind of global perspective. So you just have to spend.
You mean they value that you're not there too often?
Exactly. Yeah, that's actually a big plus because we don't bother them as much as the funds that are next door, and we have a strategy of not joining boards as a kind of business model, and they kind of see less of us, and maybe that's one of the reasons that they kind of like us more. But you just have to travel, globally to be able to maintain this edge of like really being able to see what's going on everywhere.
What are we like? I mean, you come to the U.S., you work with these with Americans who are American entrepreneurs, Americans who are building these companies. When you go back to Moscow, what do you say about us?
Well, I think we're witnessing a unique time in the U.S. history when, in the next few years, you will see an unprecedented influence of global U.S. players in, everything related to internet and information technology, with major companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and a few others really dominating globally to the extent never seen before, ever. And this domination only increases over time. And I think, it's not really recognized as yet as a major trend. So what I see is unprecedented amount of innovation going on in U.S. and in Silicon Valley in particular. And I think the extent of that is really unprecedented.
Do you, as you plot your the structure of your businesses, your business here, your business in Russia, do you see it the U.S. taking up more and more of your time? Do you still see yourself as building the business in Russia? How do you?
Well, basically, I'm the chairman of the board of the Russian entity. This is the only company that I'm on the board of, and I'm the CEO of the fund. So basically, I'm really full-time making investments globally, and just in a very limited fashion engaged in the Russian business now, especially post-IPO.
So you're really here. I mean, your future is in the U.S. market.
Globally, I would not say U.S., but really global investments.
Your business, as I understand it, in Russia, you essentially own and operate. Yes?
Well, I'm an investor and a shareholder.
But the
and
businesses that you...
it's an
that
operational
you've-
business.
Yes, I mean, you control, it's, which is different from your strategy here.
Yes.
Do you have the desire to own and operate here?
No.
Nothing can interest you?
No, because I mean, it will completely ruin the business model, which is sometimes involves investment in competing entities. And the main idea is really not to be involved in operations too much, because otherwise the conflict of interest becomes, very significant, and you are not capable of making portfolio investments.
If you can play out the Facebook scenario and your scenario with Facebook. In other words, this is the when do they go public question, and is that a time in which you take your money and go home, or do you keep the chips on the board?
Well, I've just been on a roadshow and, took one company public, so I am not sure that, everybody would want to follow that experience. So I don't know when...
In my experience, everybody wants to follow that experience, but...
I mean, it's really up to the management to make these decisions, and the... I think there are a lot of considerations going on into making this decision, so it's not a straightforward decision.
And I guess you won't tell me what you are telling them.
I am not telling them anything about, that particular aspect of the business.
The Zynga investment. Now that was a sort of, speaking of interesting potential conflicts, or I guess we could say synergies. That was an interesting one. I mean, essentially, you have this big position in Facebook, and then you invested in the company that is in a way most dependent on Facebook's goodwill.
Right.
So that was you were leveraging. I mean, it feels like you were leveraging your relationship with Facebook through your investment in Zynga, and it all begins to have that old Karatsu feeling.
I think Zynga was sort of the first derivative of the Facebook investment, because it is completely dependent right now, and it grew on the platform, but at the same time, never. It's sort of interesting that if there is a platform inside the platform, let's assume that internet is a platform and Facebook is a platform inside the platform, then if you are sitting on the smaller platform, you can grow much faster. So the companies that Facebook allowed to exist on the platform, specifically in games, were able to grow much faster compared to just on internet as a platform.
So when Zynga had its problems with Facebook, did they go through you?
Well, we have the benefit of not being involved in any operational decisions, and therefore we're just kind of observers.
I mean, just as honest broker, did they say, Yuri, we got a problem?
I think they had other brokers that they dealt through that are basically closer to the scene.
You seem pretty close to the scene. What in terms of thinking this through, in terms of figuring where you're going next, is this synergistic or Karatsu model what you're part of your strategy?
The answer is no, because again, we are in the business of buying smaller stakes in the companies. Sometimes they compete with each other, but it's almost like in the public market that you actually can buy shares in competing entities, because we invest really late stage, and sometimes it is a substitute for the company to go public. Then we can assume that we almost like invest in public entities, and therefore we should not be subject to this limitation of not investing in competing, companies.
So you're just a bystander.
Right.
Should we believe this?
I think so.
Take me through in terms of your thinking about social network as a form, as a medium, as a change in behavior. I mean, you've done more thinking about, as much thinking about this as any. You have as much money riding on this as almost anyone. What do you know?
Well, basically, there is a trend of accelerated information accumulation and exchange. So every 12 to 18 months, you see the amount of information that people exchange with each other roughly doubling, and that's on a per user basis. This is statistics that we track in various networks.
What is that? I mean, you've said this to me before, just go a little deeper. When you say that, you go, oh my God, but then you think, well, what exactly does that mean?
Well, that basically means that you have unprecedented growth of information accumulation, and that by definition means that you would need to have the mechanism to filter this information, to basically get rid of all kind of spam. And there is a social filtering mechanism where your friends basically do curation for you and select various pieces of information. But then there is also the artificial intelligence side of it, where Facebook is now, for example, suggesting you a new friend, or Facebook is trying to select the most relevant pieces of information and put them primarily in your newsfeed, and favoring certain pieces of information over other pieces of information. So therefore, in order to handle this amazing amount of information that's being created, you will definitely need an artificial intelligence. There's a huge demand for that sort of intelligence currently, just because of this unprecedented pace of information creation. So you would see more and more of that from companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter even, whereby it will be a combination of human curation and then computer curation of your life, basically. So you would be suggested new friends, you would be suggested new places to go, you would, the computer will suggest maybe a new friend network for you.
So, in other words, the ultimate result is that Facebook will be in a better position to suggest your friend, to choose your friends than you.
I think so, yes. No, I really think so, because they would track your behavior, they would know a lot about you, and they would be able to say, okay, you are much better off having this friend in China whom you don't know and never met, but he is very similar to you and you would do well together. And then there are two guys in India and one in Brazil and maybe one in Russia. So you kind of get rid of some, friends next door and, friend with them.
And how do you monetize that?
Well, I mean, if you just try to think what is the value of artificial intelligence, let's say you have a computer who is who can learn, on its own and, do it faster and faster, there is it's kind of hard to put the number on that business because it has far-reaching implications.
Still, I don't see how we're moving merchandise.
Well, basically, if the system knows all about you, they are suggesting you things to do, things to buy, places to go, stuff like that. I think it's very valuable.
One last question before we turn to audience questions. You're seeing, and when you talk about this, you talk about this in an international context, which is a different context than most Americans in the technology business or often in any business talk. Is that part of your value as an investor that you bring this perspective? And is this a part of what you, as an investor, the thing you see that we don't see, part of the value?
Well, that's not for me to say what the value is, but I'm just trying to learn from various corners of the world. I just met one very prominent entrepreneur in China who said that we can talk as communist to communist. So I think it kind of is really valuable if you can relate to all these different people and learn from them essentially, and then use it for subsequent investments.
Great. And any questions for Michael Guerin, please?
For 5 years, I was CEO of a NASDAQ-listed company that operated in Central and Eastern Europe. And 4 times a year, I had to sign the Sarbanes-Oxley attestations, which meant that the critical controls that ensured the integrity of the financial statements was particularly important. Obviously, being listed on LSE, you have different requirements, but I'm sure both as chairman and now as with public investors, you share similar concerns. Could you talk a few minutes about how you focus in Russia on dealing with these kinds of issues?
You mean the all kind of liability and reporting requirements?
Yes, and also some of the challenges that operating in the region provide.
Well, as a public company, I don't know because we just went public last Friday. So I still kind of probably will be signing those statements, hopefully not a lot and that sort of thing. But you really do not see a lot of public companies coming out of this part of the world just because of this transparency issues. And our risk factor in the prospectus was probably 50 pages long and that sort of thing. But it looked like investors in our particular case really looked into internet story mostly and really not into the regional story.
Esther.
So you're probably tired of all the business questions. Could you talk a little bit about what it was like to work with Khodorkovsky?
Was.
Yeah, was.
I worked with him for, I think, a year and a half. And every time we met, which was probably roughly once a month, I was learning something new and something valuable. So he, I think he was a very strong manager, and he was running a pretty efficient business at that time. That was 95 through 97, before he got himself in trouble. I think it was a very valuable experience.
In the back of the room, that hand that remains up.
Hi, I'm Alain Lévy from Weborama. This has been fascinating talk. We've heard a lot about the business model, and it's really fascinating. But we heard a lot about the US, about China, about Russia, about Brazil. What about Europe?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question, because when Mail.ru went public last Friday, it turned out that it was the largest internet IPO in Europe ever. So there are not too many big internet companies in Europe, and I'm kind of really thinking about why, but I don't have a proper answer for you. Hopefully there will be more.
Please.
Hi, Jennifer Cooper, media executive, serial entrepreneur. Очень приятно вас слышать. The question I have is on the broad Facebook platform that is designed for lots and lots of different applications. Zynga is arguably one of the biggest and the most successful. However, with the resources that Zynga now has from their other investors and from you, how does another Zynga come to be? And how do other applications grow up, to be another Zynga and provide other types of successes for the Facebook platform?
Well, there was this very interesting Wired issue about the web is dead. Michael contributed to that. That basically made a very interesting observation that there is a time of, when there's a new sector is opening up, there are a lot of small companies, and the gold rush in US, a lot of small entrepreneurs, digging gold and then oil. A lot of small companies, but then inevitably somebody comes in and does consolidation. It always happens in every single sector. I think that was one of the ideas of this article.
That's because it was your idea that you gave
No.
to me. This is a very small circle.
No, that was, I think,
That was my idea.
Anderson. No?
No, I'm sure it wasn't Chris's
Okay.
idea.
So what you really see is a lot of consolidation around these platforms taking place, and that's sort of the inevitable course of events that the big companies just over time become bigger and the smaller kind of remain small. So I think we're witnessing this period in internet when just a few companies probably will dominate in the next 10 years.
Can you see who I'm pointing at? I'm just sort of.
Hi. You made an interesting point about being
Could you say
sort
who
of.
you are, please?
I'm sorry, Stan Magnon with a publicist. You made an interesting point about the ideal position of Russia being between the East and West, and that you could see in Asia and China things that would probably happen a few years down the road in the US and Europe. So it's a great point of observation. Do you see from where you stand social networking habits and new uses emerging from Asia that we don't have yet in Europe and in the US in terms of social networking habits and ethos?
I basically see now more unification of business models and more proliferation in both major markets, US and China. So they really learn how to monetize user payments, and they are perfecting that over time. That's much more prominent than on Facebook, for example, which is probably dominated by advertising self-serve ad model. But you're also beginning to see that in China as well. So and in Russia, it's interesting that we almost have a equal mix, of advertising user payments in our company. So I just believe that over time you would see more proliferation and more uniformity in what's going on in the world. So you see, Russian social networks launching, Facebook Connect type of products. You see that in China as well. You see, news feeds and, everything else. So I just see globalization sort of taking its toll.
I'm just going to step in and a mercy rule. Should we say 2 more questions? Does that sound right? Or you guys want to keep going? It's entirely up to you.
It's up to you.
Let's call it 3 questions.
3 questions. Okay.
Against the wall.
Hi, Elizabeth Charnock from Cataphora. I'm curious as to whether your background in theoretical physics helps you to look at something like Facebook, better understand all the types of graph computations that could be done, such as some of the observations you've made on this panel today. I ask in part because I'm by training a pure mathematician, and I know it does really affect how I look at things.
Well, maybe that helps to relate to this, people. I mean, it's basically what we're seeing right now is the era of mathematicians basically playing a very prominent role in the world. I mean, that's what I see. So I think it's a unique period of time.
I just want to note that I've never heard this before, the era of mathematicians. So let's.
Yeah, because I mean, they've never been able to have such a significant influence because not enough people were connected. But now, when you see 2 billion people connected and very cheap computers and very cheap access, so you can see somebody who comes up with a very smart mathematical formula being able to have a significant influence. So, and I think that's what Facebook, the social network movie is about. It's about, these people coming out and having a very significant influence on many aspects.
So it's not about social networking, it's about math.
I think so.
It's, the gentleman with the mustache. No, do you have a mustache? From here, it looks like you have a mustache. Anyway, yes, you.
Yeah, hi, it's Oleg, founder and CEO of Editorial, Aliag in Russian. So I subscribed to the Mail.ru IPO. I was lucky to get some shares, and I have a very simple question. They took $9 since the trading, first day of trade. Should I keep them or sell them?
The answer is I don't know, because we are now all at the mercy of the market. I'm also a shareholder. Although you have a benefit of not being locked in as I am, but I think in a few months we'll be equal. But I'm not an expert in public markets, so.
One more question, and whoever gets the microphone first gets to ask it.
Hey, Yuri. It's good to see you. My name is Richard Cooperstein. I run Media Investment Group, and I was the original head of international business development and strategy at Facebook and part of the original conversations. And obviously, everyone's delighted and excited that you're part of the Facebook family and that you've been doing such a great job with managing your assets. I have the 2-part question. A number of your early investments in Russia, in particular in social networking, had achieved some significant scale and success in the local market. And at the same time, Facebook has been relatively unsuccessful to date in penetrating the Russian market. Are there any specific ways in which the integration or the movement towards more unification of some of these features or potentially these assets could take place? So in other words, are some of your existing prior assets, those underlying assets, scalable for Facebook in any way? And then secondarily, just in terms of your overall outlook on the investment opportunities, you've made some great investments in sort of social networking and obviously gaming. What are some big buckets of opportunities that you see going forward?
Well, on the second question, I think, when Mark Zuckerberg is saying that, you know, every single business model in internet will be disrupted by social, I sort of agree with that. And I think we're looking at various facets of that strategy. So just, you know, looking at, you know, other, more of the same in a way. And then on the first question, Russia was one of the few countries with not a lot of cross-border interactions, similar to maybe Japan and South Korea and China. And in countries like that, Facebook has usually kind of a slow start because, you know, they tend to penetrate in the countries through English speakers and through people who travel a lot and that sort of thing. So I think this, you know, bigger places that are more isolated, you know, they just have a slow start usually. But then, you know, it's just kind of really a matter of whose product is better. Thank you very much.
Yuri, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, I do not want to let it pass